Hello and welcome back to Afjer Audiobooks. Today I'll be reading one of my all-time favorite series, starting with Book 1. This is Ranger's Apprentice, Book 1, The Ruins of Gorlan by John Flanagan. If you want to read more from John Flanagan, his name is spelled Johnflanagan. Trust me when I say that he is a fantastic author. Name is also shown on the screen. Before we begin, keep in mind that I have little access to editing software and very little experience with editing, so this will definitely not be the best audiobook you've ever heard. Let us begin. Chapter 9. All credit to author. Horace dropped his pack on the floor in the dormitory and fell across his bed, groaning with relief. Every muscle in his body ached. He had no idea that he could feel so sore, so worn out. He had no idea that there were so many muscles in the human body that could feel this way. Not for the first time, he wondered if he were going to get through the three years of battle school training. He'd been a cadet for less than a week, and already he was a total physical wreck. When he'd applied for battle school, Horace had a vague notion of glittering, armor-clad knights doing battle with lesser folk stood by and watched in awed admiration. Quite a few of those lesser folk in his mental picture had been attractive girls. Jenny, his year-mate in the ward, had been prominent among them. To him, battle school had been a place of glamour and adventure, and battle school cadets were people that others looked up to and envied. The reality was something else. So far, battle school cadets were people who rose before the dawn and spent the hour before breakfast doing a severe course of physical training, running, lifting weights, standing in lines of 10 or more to lift and hold heavy logs over their heads. Exhausted by all this, they were returned to their quarters, where they had the opportunity to take a brief shower. The water was cold, before making sure the dormitory and ablutions block were absolutely spotless. Quarters inspection came after that, and was painstaking. Sir Carroll, the wiry old knight who carried out the inspection, knew every trick in the book when it came to taking shortcuts and cleaning the dormitory, making your bed and stowing your kit. The slightest infringement on the part of one of the 20 boys in the dormitory would mean all their kit would be scattered across the floor, the beds turned over, the rubbish bins emptied on the floor, and they would have to turn to and start again, at the time when they should have been having breakfast. As a consequence, new cadets only tried once to pull the wool over Sir Carl's eyes. Breakfast was nothing special. In fact, in Horace's opinion, it was downright basic. But if you missed it, it was a long, hard morning into the lunch hour, which, in keeping the Spartan life in battle school, was only 20 minutes long. After breakfast, there were classes for 2 hours in military history, the theory of tactics, and so on. Then the cadets were usually required to run the obstacle course, a series of obstacles designed to test speed, agility, balance, and strength. There was a minimum time standard for the course. It had to be completed in under 5 minutes, and any cadet who failed to do so was immediately sent back to the start to try again. It was rare that anyone completed the course without falling at least once, and the course was littered with mud pools, water hazards, and pits filled with nameless but unpleasant matter whose origin Horace didn't want to even think about. Lunch followed the obstacle course, but if you'd fallen during the run, you had to clean up before entering the mess hall, another of those famous cold showers, and that usually took half the time set aside for the meal break. As a consequence, Horace's overwhelming impressions of the first week of battle school were a combination of aching muscles and gnawing hunger. There were more classes after lunch than physical jerks in the castle yard in the eye of one of the senior year cadets. Then the castle would form up and perform close order drills until the end of the school day, when they would have 2 hours to themselves to clean and repair gear and prepare lessons for the following day's classes. Unless, of course, someone had transgressed during the course of the day, or in some way caused displeasure to one of their instructors or observers, in which case they would all be invited to load their packs with rocks and set out on a 12-kilometer run along a course mapped out through the surrounding countryside. Invariably, the course was nowhere near any of the level roads or tracks in the area. It meant running through broken, uneven ground, up hills and across streams, through heavily overgrown thickets where hanging vines and thick underbrush would claw at you and try to pull you down. Horace had just completed one such run. Earlier in the day, one of his classmates had spotted in Tactics 1 passing a note to a friend. Unfortunately, the note was not in the form of text, but was an unflattering caricature of a long-nosed instructor who taught the class. Equally unfortunately, the boy possessed considerable skill as a cartoonist, and the drawing was instantly recognizable. As a result, Horace and his class had been invited to fill those packs and start running. He gradually felt himself pulling away from the rest of the boys as they labored up the first hill. Even after a few days, the strict regime of the battle school was beginning to show results with Horace. He was fitter than he'd ever been in his life. Added to that was the fact that he had natural ability as an athlete. Though he was unaware of it, he ran with balance and grace, where the others seemed to struggle. As the run progressed, he found himself far in front of the others. He pounded on, head up and breathing evenly through his nostrils. So far, he hadn't had much chance to get to know his new classmates. He'd seen most of them around the castle or the village over the years, of course, but growing up in the ward had tended to isolate him from the normal, day-to-day life of the castle and village. Ward children couldn't help but feel different from the others, and it was a feeling that the boys and girls with parents still living reciprocated. The choosing ceremony was peculiar to ward members only. Horace was one of the 20 new battle school recruits this year. The other 19 came through what was considered the normal process: parental influence, patronage, or recommendation from their teachers. As a result, he was regarded as something of a curiosity, and the other boys had so far made no overtures of friendship, or even much attempt to get to know him. Still, he thought, smiling with grim satisfaction, he had beaten them all on the run. None of the others were back yet. He'd shown them all right. The door at the end of the dormitory crashed back on its hinges, and heavy boots sounded on the bare floorboards. Horace raised himself on one elbow and groaned inwardly. Bryn, Alda, and Jerome were marching toward him between the neat rows of perfectly made beds. I suppose it's probably Brian, isn't it? I don't know. They were second-year cadets that seemed to have decided that their life's work was to make Horace's life miserable. Quickly he swung his legs over the side of the bed and stood up, but not quickly enough. "What are you doing lying in bed?" Alda yelled at him. "Who told you it was lights out?" Bryn and Jerome grinned. They enjoyed Alda's verbal sallies. They weren't anywhere near as original, but they made up for their lack of verbal invention with a heavy reliance on their physical side of things. 20 push-ups, Bryn ordered. Now. Horace hesitated a moment. He was actually bigger than any of them. If it came to confrontation, he was sure he could beat any one of them. But they were 3. Besides, they had the authority of tradition behind them. As far as he knew, it was normal practice for second year to treat first-year cadets like this, and he could imagine the scorn of his classmates if he were to complain to authority about it. Nobody likes a crybaby, he told himself as he began to drop to the ground. But Bryn had seen the hesitation and perhaps even the fleeting light of rebellion in his eyes. 30 push-ups, he snapped. Do it now. His muscles protesting, Horace dropped full length to the floor and began the push-ups. Immediately he felt a foot in the small of his back, bearing down on him as he tried to raise himself from the floor. "Come on, baby." It was Jerome now. "Put a bit of effort into it." Horace struggled through a push-up. Jerome had developed the skill of maintaining just the right amount of pressure. Any more and Horace would never have been able to complete the push-up, but the second-year cadet also kept pressing down as Horace started back down again. This made the exercise all the harder. He had to maintain the same amount of upward pressure as he lowered himself. Otherwise, he'd be driven hard against the floor. Groaning, he completed the first, then started another. "Stop crying, baby," Alda yelled at him. Then he moved to Horace's bed. "Didn't you make this bed this morning?" he yelled. Horace, struggling up against the pressure of Jerome's foot, could only grunt in reply. What? Alda bent so his face was only centimeters away. "What's that, baby? Speak up." Sir," Horace managed to whisper. Alda shook his head in an exaggerated movement. "No, sir, I think," he said, standing upright again. "Look at this bed. It's a pigsty." Naturally, the covers were a little rumpled where Horace had dropped across the bed, but it would have taken only a second or two to straighten them. Grinning, Bryn cottoned onto. Wow, okay. This chapter's hard to read. I apologize. Grinning, Bryn cottoned onto Alda's plan. He stepped forward and kicked the bed over on its side, spilling mattresses, blankets, and pillows across the floor. Alda joined in, kicking the blankets across the floor. "Make the bed again," he yelled. Then a light gleamed in his eye, and he turned to the next bed in line, kicking it over as well, scattering the bedclothes and mattresses as he'd done to horses. "Make them all again," he yelled, delighted with his idea. Bryn joined him, grinning widely as they tumbled to the 20 beds, scattering blankets, pillows, and mattresses around the room. Horace, struggling still through the 30 push-ups, gritted his teeth. Perspiration ran into his eyes, stinging them and blurring his vision. "Crying, are you, baby?" he heard Jerome yell. "Go home and cry to Mummy then." His foot shoved viciously into Horace's back, sending him sprawling on the floor. "Baby doesn't have a mummy," Alda said. "Baby's a war brat. Mummy ran off with a riverboat sailor." Jerome bent down to him again. "Is that right, baby?" "Yes. Did Mummy run away and leave you?" "My mother is dead." Horace grated at them. Angrily, he began to rise, but Jerome's foot was on the back of his neck, thrusting his face against the hard boards. Horace gave up on the attempt. "Very sad," Alda said, and the other two laughed. "Now clean this mess up, baby. We'll have to run the course again." "We'll have you run the course again." Horace lay, exhausted, as the three older boys swaggered out of the room, tipping footlockers over as they went, spilling his roommate's belongings onto the floor. He closed his eyes as salt perspiration stung its way into them again. "I hate this place," he said, his voice muffled by the rough planks on the floor. And that is the end of the chapter. Again, I'm sorry, I was struggling a little more than usual today. Might still be a little out of breath, I don't know. But thank you so much for listening, and I will see you in the next reading. Bye.